We're at Norma's home today, and we decided this was a really good opportunity to hear some things that we might not know about your ancestors and about you and about our ancestors. And so we thought we'd take an opportunity to ask you some things that we want to preserve. And one of the things is to tell us about your grandma and grandpa Smith, what you can remember about them.
Well, the earliest the earliest memory I have of them was when we went to their farm up in Idaho on the Fall River, where they had built their log cabin. And we went to visit them, and I remember getting out of the whatever we rode in, getting out and running towards their home, and Grandpa was out in the field, in the pea patch, picking his peas. And I remember seeing him and his long beard. And then we stayed there overnight, and this was in a cabin without a floor in it.
Dirt floor.
No floor at all. I remember that my father and Grandpa went out, and I don't know how they got a hold of them, but they got prairie chickens and brought them in and dressed them, and we cooked them. They did, and we had prairie chickens for the meal that night. And I remember going and seeing him in that pea patch. I don't remember. They lived on the Fall River in Idaho, where they had been sent to what do you call it?
Colonized?
Yes, colonized there
By Brigham
by
Young?
the church. And that must have been when I was about 4 years old. We stayed there then, and then left and went to Billings, Montana, where they went into a large, several-story department store where they bought us some new clothes. I remember they bought Marjorie had a brown, no, I guess it was green coat and coat and hat. And I remember going up into the second or third floor of the store where they had their clothing departments, and they picked out some brand new clothes, dresses and coats and stuff for us. Mine was a brown coat with a brown fur collar, and they've got a brown fur hat, I guess it was a bonnet. And Marjorie's was a green serge with ruffled laces around the collar. And they were so beautiful and brand new, you know.
And you've never forgotten them.
These were bought for us on our trip north into Canada, where my father had a job with a music company tuning pianos.
Where do you suppose they got the money to do that?
Well, I don't have any idea where they got the money.
Because they weren't
He
very
saved
well
it
off
up.
at the time.
They were expensive clothes, and Mama had a new outfit too, but I can't remember hers. But anyway, I remember they did buy us all new clothes.
For some reason, some way, they got some money.
Yeah.
What vehicle were you traveling in?
In trains. In a train.
How did you get to Idaho then? By train?
No, I think we must have got by horse and buggy or horse and wagon or something. I'm sure that we did, but I don't remember what they did with them or what we did from there. But I know that we went on the train to Canada, where we rode in the train, and we went into the dining car for our meals. And I don't remember how long the trip took, but it seemed like it was a long time.
Stop long enough so I can do this.
Let's go back and tell us what you remember about Grandma and Grandpa Smith, because we don't know them.
You got that all down. Okay. Well, I know that Grandpa was sent up into Idaho on the Fall River to colonize, help to colonize out there. And then I told you about their log cabin.
And he was a farmer, obviously.
Is what?
A farmer.
Well, that's all they had was just what they could get out of the ground. And I know that he raised peas, like I told you. For their meat, they just caught what they got. You know, they would get the prairie chickens. I think they call them now grouse.
Ralph.
And well, life was hard there because they didn't have the conveniences that we do.
Did they have other children besides your mother?
Oh yes, Uncle Henry and Aunt Lula. Aunt Lula had already married, not Lula, but Hattie, H-A-T-T-I. She had married and they had several sons. And then the sixth child they had was Stella, my cousin, the only girl. Seven sons and one daughter.
That sounds like me.
Yeah.
Were you named after your Aunt Lula?
Yes.
So was your mother?
Lula she was not married. She was working in St. Anthony, I guess, in a department store. And I guess she was working in one of the hotels there as a hotel maid or whatever they did. And she was accosted by a man and a stranger and raped.
Oh, really?
Yes. And when they found out that she was pregnant, she was devastated and she tried to abort the child by herself with a hat pin.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, it killed her.
Oh, it did.
Yeah, she died. And I don't know whether she died of poisoning from that hat pin or from the acting. What she died of was that.
Oh, that's very sad.
Yeah. So she was never married. And Hattie was married and had these 6 sons and 1 daughter. And she died when Stella was born, of childbirth. And Grandma Smith couldn't take care of her all the time, so she gave her to Aunt Hattie's daughter, Aunt Hattie's husband, Uncle Alma, I think his name was Alma, gave her to Grandma to raise.
Stella, you're
Yes.
talking
He's even signed papers giving her to him.
about. So legally adopted.
Yeah, so she wouldn't be given back or something. So Grandma raised Stella as her own daughter,
Wow.
and but she always called her Grandma, so she wasn't misled in her history. And she's still alive. Stella is still alive, and she's a little bit older than I am. She lives in, she married, and I don't remember how many children she had. But she lives in Maryland or Virginia, I'm not sure. She's still alive back there.
Well, that was a sad story, huh?
Yeah.
Well, what about Grandma Smith? She must have been a pretty nice lady to take care of a...
Oh yeah, she was. She raised these children really good. Mama was very fastidious in her housekeeping and the care of the children. She made all our clothes from underwear up.
Yeah,
And
tell
the
us about
underwear
that.
was all made of flour sacks that were bleached. Mama bleached everything she washed, always, in a copper boiler, and boiled his clothes constantly. I remember Mama when we were real young, that she would sing to us, sing us the songs of the day and different songs. But I remember her singing.
Well, so tell us more about the underwear made out of flour sacks.
Well, she made them clothes. She sewed them, and we always had good, clean underwear. And our dresses were always white
Wow.
because there was no other,
There's no color.
no colors, and just bleached. Wherever we went, we had clean clothes.
So what was it like to wear underwear made out of flour sacks? Was it itchy?
No, I don't remember.
Was it
being
soft?
itchy. Soft.
It was probably cotton, so it would have
Yeah,
been
it
soft.
was all cotton. Not anything was stiff.
But did they have to be ironed?
Well, I don't remember if they had to be ironed, but I know Mama did a lot of ironing.
So if she was fastidious, that's probably where you got it, right?
Very much. Very little in the house to make housekeeping, but it was always immaculate.
Mm-hmm.
She was very good.
She was talented. That's where you got it, I
Yeah.
bet. Well, let's move on to something else. Tell us more about your mother. Well, if you could describe her personality so that we'd know
Well,
what she was like.
She was very small.
How small? 5 feet or
Yeah, she was 5 feet, just barely one or something like that. She was very short.
just a tiny little
Now,
lady?
she was working when she was working in a department store when she was a young lady, and my father came there, and he didn't know anybody there. But he met my mother there. My ears are clogged up.
Take a break.
Talk some more about your mother first.
Okay, go.
All right.
I know that mother, I remember her telling me that they had to go miles in the deep snow to go to school. And I remember her saying that on the way to school, lots of times they would hear the wolves howl
Wow. Now, where was this?
in Idaho.
Okay,
Yeah.
by the Paul River, that same place?
Yeah. Now, how long they lived there, I don't know. Anyway, they went to school there. And then she later worked in a department store as a clerk.
Uh-huh.
And that's where she met Papa. And I don't know where he came from or why he stopped there. But when he saw Mother, I guess he fell in love with her immediately. And it wasn't long until they were married.
Tell us what she looked like, besides being little.
She was pretty and she was small, very short.
How tall?
About 11,
5 feet or
5'11", I think.
4 foot 11?
4 feet 11, yeah.
I think she had brown hair, didn't she? Really
She
pretty
had
brown hair.
rich brown hair, and she wore it with it brought to the top of her head,
Uh-huh.
which I guess most of them did at those days. How they all lived in that little log cabin, I don't remember. I can't imagine.
And to keep your clothes clean and on a dirt
Scrubbing
floor,
on
that
the
would be
scrub
pretty
board.
hard, wouldn't it?
And boiling.
How do you suppose she got to the department store to work? Did she live in town, or did she go back and forth every day?
I don't know how far they lived from town, from Chester.
Uh-huh.
I just don't remember having the idea. And I don't remember how she got the job. Well, I don't, of course I wasn't there yet.
Right. But I wondered if she'd told you about it. But she, so she worked in a department store, and your grandfather walked in and took one look at her and decided she's the one, huh?
Not her grandfather, her
Her-
father.
Your father,
I guess
that's right.
she really fell in love with him.
Did she fell in love with him too?
Yeah, oh yes. So they were married, I think married in Uncle, at Hattie's home.
Uh-huh. Now, how long did they know each other before they got married?
I don't remember, I don't know that. Not very
Not
long,
very
I
long.
guess.
How do you suppose your parents felt about her marrying somebody who wasn't a member of the church?
I don't know how they thought about it, but I know in later years I found a letter that someone in the family had written to Grandma or somebody, and they said, the letter said something about why did she fall with that lanky, let's see, that long, tall, like drink of water,
Oh.
something like that. They thought it was ridiculous, I guess.
And that he wasn't a member of the church.
No, he was not a member
That
of the church.
must have been a problem then too.
They never, apparently never, that was a problem to them.
Right, but I mean, coming from a Mormon pioneer family though, that might have. But were your grandparents cordial to him? I mean, they
Oh, I'm
treated
sure
him
they
well.
were. You see, he took us there just to visit
Mhm.
after we came back from Canada.
Mhm.
I'll tell you about the trip to Canada.
Okay.
We went on the train, of course, with these new clothes.
Feeling very handsome and rich.
Oh yes, he was tall and handsome, and I remember going on the train and eating in the dining room, dining car, and we got into Canada in Lethbridge,
I think that's right.
Lethbridge, Ontario,
Alberta.
Canada. When Papa had been hired by a music company there as piano tutor and I don't know what they call it, fixer.
A mender or something. Repairman?
And how they got this place to live, I don't remember, but it was in a home where the mother had died, and they had 2 or 3 children, and he hired Papa to come and live there and be housekeeper and caretaker for their children,
Oh.
and that's how come we there. And I remember a long dining room table that we'd all sit around, and white tablecloth, and all these big rooms, and an indoor toilet.
Wow, that must have been
Yes.
fun.
That was a thrill to me, I can remember that. And I guess we lived there 4 years.
Wow. Must have been a family of some means then.
Yeah, from these, that's right. I remember that on the nice days, we would go out and we'd go into the town in a park, and Papa would buy cheese and crackers, and we'd eat cheese and crackers, and I remember eating those.
So had Evelyn come along by then? Was Evelyn part of the family by then?
Well, you mean
She'd been born. She was.
Aunt Evelyn.
Yeah, was.
Evelyn.
Were all 3 of you girls then? You had you and Marjorie, and Evelyn was born now too?
yeah,
Okay. And was your baby brother born yet?
no,
Okay. So you go to the park and have a good time?
yeah. And on one trip when Papa was going to work, he looked down and there was a gold bracelet out in the gutter. So he picked it up and nobody looked, there was nobody there, so he keep it and give it to Mama. I still have that gold bracelet. I don't know where it is.
Oh dear.
Sometime or other, and I don't know when, he bought Mama a ring with a little diamond on it. She prized that very greatly. I can remember that diamond.
What had happened to the ring?
I'll have to tell you about that. I don't remember much about the trip back down into the States, or why he did. I think he got another job down in Idaho Falls. I remember that Mama's sisters, no, not sisters, Aunt Sarah, I don't remember who they were, whether they were Grandpa's sisters or not, but one was redheaded, and the other dark-haired. I remember them coming to visit. They're Grandma Smith's sisters, that's what they were. Yeah. So they were Kershaws. Now the Kershaw family is from South Africa.
Mhm. Yeah, we have pretty good documentation on them. A lot of family history has been written about them. So why don't you tell us about the ring?
Well, she had that ring for many years, but on one trip we had when we were in, we went on a trip, let's see, from Weezer up towards Cambridge, north, and stayed in a tent. And later on in the day, Mama missed that ring. And she just grieved over that ring, something terrible.
I'll bet.
Is that phone ringing?
Good on you.
Okay.
Okay, now tell us.
We hadn't left Idaho Falls yet to go east, to go west to Cambridge, where my father's sister lived. Aunt Molly and her two daughters. One daughter had married, and they had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, Moorfields. And but when we got there to Cambridge, to Aunt Molly's home, Papa just, when he saw her in the bed, he broke down on his knees on the bed, hugging her, crying on her. And first time he'd seen her for 40 years.
Wow.
And here she was, completely crippled like this. She had raised her children from that bed for 18 or 20 years.
What did she have? Rheumatoid arthritis?
Yes, rheumatoid arthritis. In a position like this, with her knees bent up and her hands like this.
Mm.
She'd never been able to get out of that bed.
Wow.
So her family had to take care of her that day. So Papa hadn't seen her for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he just broke down. I can remember him yet, on his knees, with his arms around her, crying. It was a sad scene. So that was the first time that they had seen us, or we've seen them. Their daughter married, I forgot their names, Warfield,
Mm-hmm.
Dan Warfield, and their sons was I forgot. Anyway, they had 2 daughters and their sons. These are our cousins.
Mm-hmm.
First we'd seen them, so we stayed there for a while, and I remember that every summer we'd go back up there for canning season, where Mama and Papa's niece, she was crippled. She had a stroke when one of the children were born, and she was crippled. She had to drag her right leg. But she had raised those children and kept house.
Wow.
And I remember that we'd go up there every summer.
Up there meaning where?
Cambridge, Idaho,
Idaho.
to visit and stay with my cousins in their home. And then they would let me get on the horse's back and ride horses. That's
Wow.
the first I've been on a horse, or near one even. I remember trying to ride one and hold on. But every night they'd take me with them to go gather up the cows, the cattle, to bring them in so they could be milked. And I remember that it was the first time we'd ever been around animals. So it was quite an exciting thing. But every summer we would leave Weezer and go up to Cambridge, where Mama and my crippled cousin would can those peaches, and they'd can up a dozen or more boxes, big 40-pound boxes of fruit, peaches and whatever else. I remember that Mama could never stand to peel or get her hands onto the fuzzy part of a peach.
Oh.
It bothered her so badly.
Oh, allergies maybe?
Yeah, just not so much allergy. She was allergic to it.
She just didn't like it.
She just couldn't stand the fuzz. So Ben would go down to Payette, Idaho, which was south there. Must have been about 80 miles. They were horse and wagon to get the boxes of fruit to bring up so they could can the bottles after bottles up. They would do that for a whole week, can fruit,
A lot
nothing
of
else.
Peaches and what else? Pears, peaches?
Yeah.
Just peaches?
Peaches and apricots.
Apricots.
Apricots were the worst thing for her to handle.
Oh.
But every summer we'd go up there to do that for Boys Weiser. We were in a house by then in Weiser, Idaho. In Weiser's where, in this little house where we were living, if I could get a hold of a book, I'd climb a tree and sit there and read for hours. And that's where my sister friend, Marion Highlander, came in. They lived across the railroad tracks south of us in a big house where I would go and visit Marion and she would come and visit me.
What was her last name?
Hmm?
What was her last name again?
Yancey.
Yancey.
And I was always allowed to go and live and stay with Marion in their house. They couldn't come and stay with me in our house because we didn't have any room.
Mm-hmm.
No bedrooms, no just outdoor toilets.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where Marion and I spent our years in school and home and church, always together.
How old were you?
Huh?
How old were you then?
Well, I guess I was 10, 11, 12 years old.
So she was your dear friend,
Oh, yeah.
and
We
her
were just-
sister was Rosemary Reed, who became famous later on.
Yeah.
So did you know Rosemary too?
Huh?
Did you know Rosemary?
Oh, yes. Yeah, she was not married. I can remember her. She was so beautiful. She had beautiful auburn hair, curls. And she always had it waved, like they call it Marcel. But she always had it waved so pretty, and her hair was just gorgeous. And I remember going into their house. Their father, Brother Yancey, would sit in the kitchen with his feet up on the lid of the stove.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and their mother, Marie Yancey, would sit on his lap.
Oh,
She always was on his lap. I can remember right
she
now.
liked him.
Oh, they just were so good. They had 2 sons. One was away in college and one was on mission. But I didn't know them too well at that time. I remember the youngest one was named, I can't remember right now what his name was. But they had a talent of art and painted. Years later, when I grew up, after I was married, I went to a state fair and saw him there painting of pictures. And I got one of his paintings. As soon as I told him who I was, he knew who I was. And then later on, after that, he and his wife and another couple were going on a trip to somewhere in the north in an airplane. The airplane crashed and went into the ocean, and that's where he was killed.
Oh dear.
Let's see.
That. Well, you know what? We didn't get on video the part about your father searching for the ring. You said your mother was so devastated when she lost her little ring with the diamond, and that you were staying in a tent on your way somewhere. So tell us about that.
Well, we just were on the way to Cambridge, or farther up, I guess it was, where they stayed overnight, and in a tent, they pitched a tent, put straw on the ground, and that's when she lost the ring, I guess. But I remember him going up the side of the mountain to hunt grouse. And he let me try the gun held the gun, you know, tried to end it, and it knocked me down on my back.
Had a
So,
kick.
Yeah, that's all I wanted of that.
How old were you?
About 9 or 10, something like that.
Well, it must have been a shotgun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
shotgun, it just shot me back. I guess he knew that it would, but he let me, because he wanted me to see if I could see if I could kill a grouse, which I couldn't, of course. I never knew I couldn't do anything.
You thought you could do everything.
Yeah. Well, later on then, when we,
Don't forget to tell us about your father looking for the ring.
well, they did. They just went to the site where the tent was no longer there, but there was straw all around. And I guess he just got down and hunted through that straw with his hands until he found it. Because she knew that's where they had been. And you know how a woman is, they want their ring.
They want their ring. So he found it. She must have been happy.
Oh, she was very happy.
And where's the ring now?
Oh, years later, I don't have any idea where that ring ever got to. No, not at all.
That'd be special to have it,
Yeah.
wouldn't it? What kind of a child were you? You
I
said your dad,
always-
you thought you could do
I thought
everything.
there was nothing I couldn't do, or nothing I didn't want to do.
You wanted to try everything?
I wanted to try everything.
Do you think you were a challenge for your parents
Oh, I'm sure I was.
and your
Let's
sisters?
get back into when we first went to Weezer and lived in this little house. I can remember Mama just screaming with pain. She had a terrible time. They had taken her to doctors, but they couldn't do anything with her. They just knew that she had gallstones. She'd have such trials, her attacks would be so strong that Papa would have a neighbor come in and help hold it down and give her ether. And I'm sure that ether was one of the things that killed her. Too much of that.
Yeah.
Finally, they did take her. He took her to Payette, which was, I don't know, 89 miles south of Weezer, to a hospital, and she was operated on. That's where they found the 27 gallstones.
Gosh.
They kept them for a long time in a bag, you know, in a jar, so we could see them. And she was never strong after that, but carried on.
The ether damaged her heart, probably. Okay, we were talking once about your little brother. So tell us what you were telling me before about
Well,
that terrible flu epidemic.
yes,
of,
that was in Idaho Falls, or back in that area. I don't remember what time it was, what town. That was in Blackfoot, I think, where he died. And that was a terrible time. That was right down. The flu epidemic was everywhere.
It was 1917, right?
Doctors couldn't come, and if they couldn't do anything. And I told you about where he's took the brandy and hold it, and tip it over a candle flame to get it warm, just so it was right. So they give it to him, you know, see if they could.
Did he have congestion? He couldn't
Yes,
breathe?
a terrible congestion, cough, you know, it was awful. See, he was only 4.
And so the brandy tried to stimulate.
Yes, that's what they thought, you know.
Uh-huh.
So he died, and it was, of course, terrible time. I can remember Mama crying so much. Well, after that, then Papa went and bought. This was just before Christmas. Must have been in November when he died. You'd have to look up in the records, then you could tell. But he went to the department store and bought new dolls for all of us, the 3 girls.
Mm-hmm.
And he bought me these dolls were, at that time they were different kind, but they got the kind that had joints in their knees and their arms and their hair. They were so beautiful. The little play dishes, they bought me a set of those. Anyway, Papa had found a man, befriended a man that was carrying heavy duty machinery to the east.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to go across the desert with a truck hauling this machinery.
Mm-hmm.
And how they got arranged it or what happened, I don't know. But for us to be transported on that truck, we had to sit in the back with those machinery. Mama and us girls did. And they would go up the sides of the mountain. It's a terrible big, over the Salmon River, you know.
Mm.
Mountains were terribly high there. And to get up to that, we had to rock up through the woods, you know, up through the woods to the next. This was like a hairpin turns, the road was.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd go up the mountain side until we got to one part of the road. And it would go, the road was going up this, and we'd keep going up. Mama carrying Evelyn.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember she was 4 years old. And she would carry her on her back. And they said afterwards they don't know how we kept from getting killed by bears or lions.
Mountain
What do you call
lions.
Cougars.
Cougars.
Lots of them in the mountains.
Mm.
Was that in your Model T Ford?
Huh?
Was that in a Model T Ford?
Well, I don't know. It was a big truck.
Well, that's. I
Those
think it was a
times I
Model
don't
T.
know what-
Did you have to go backwards up the hills?
No, they went forwards, and Papa would take it off and stand side with a big rock, just to what do you call it, chuck the wheels.
Uh-huh.
Whenever he couldn't go any farther, you know, with the driver was going, and if it stopped, well, he had to career quick and get that chuck on those wheels. And with the last going up, about the last one, he had to chuck and jammed on his fingers, mashed his thumb and 2 fingers, terribly bad. Not only mashed him, but you know, the
Broke the fingers too?
It broke them. So he was in terrible condition to have to finish getting up on the top of that mountain. So when they needed so many turns like this up that mountain, when they finally got to the top and got us into the truck, went to the other side, down inside. The Papa was bandaged as much as they could, you know, right there. Couldn't do anything with him. I remember looking down as we were going down the mountains of those roads, way, way down to that river. And it was wide and swift, and we could see the salmon swimming in that water.
Wow.
I can remember today, just looking down and seeing those salmon so big. I guess they were salmon or trout, but they were large. But they got down to the end of that trail. There was a big clearing and a barn on eventually somebody's abandoned homestead, I guess. So they decided to camp there and get Papa down farther to a doctor. So that they pitched a tent for us and I guess the other 2. And in the night, they heard Papa slept with a gun right beside him. In the night, they heard something coming into the door. Well, it was a porcupine.
Oh.
You know, he didn't know what a porcupine was anyway. I guess he thought it was a real dangerous animal, and he chased it out. There was a big barn there, and they would have loved to have gotten into that barn, but it was so full of rats that they could,
Ooh.
just terrible.
Mm.
So we kept there about 8 days, as I remember. So Papa's could get terror to his hands. I remember the mama cooking and washing the clothes there over her bonfire. But that was a long stay there.
Well, did his fingers get better then eventually?
Well, eventually it got better, you know, got healed up. It was more or less mashed and cut with the rock. You know.
Yeah.
It was a terrible time.
So then where did you end up eventually on that
Then
journey?
we ended up at, let's see, Mackey, I think it was the name of the town.
Macchiato.
Yeah. And he pitched a tent there, built a floor first, and then got the tent on the floor with a floor on it, under it. I remember it was on a creek, a little river, but a little creek, I guess it was, deep, and I can remember seeing fish in the water. I got a hold of some string or something and made a fish hook out of a safety pin, and I could catch the fish, and I caught 3 of them on there.
Wow.
In that creek. And I was never afraid of water, so I got in there and swam in that creek. And that's where I learned to swim, and I just took off. Papa was so proud of me. But the other girls wouldn't touch it. They wouldn't get in there.
It's probably cold.
Oh, it was very cold. But I didn't care. I'd go in there and swim.
What did you
But
wear?
I always took
All your clothes?
Huh?
Did you wear all your clothes, or did you take some
I
off?
think I took everything off but my pants. I don't remember for sure. That's where I learned to swim. I just said, well, off to myself, I want to get to the other side, and the only way to get there was to paddle, so I did.
And how old were you?
Oh, I guess I could have been 8 or 9.
8 or 9.
About that.
Well, then your sisters then would have been
They
very
wouldn't
young.
go near that water.
Well, they would have been very young.
Yeah, they were probably too little anyway.
Yeah.
But you were brave anyway, right?
Huh?
You were brave, though.
Oh, I didn't consider myself brave. It's just I always wanted to do things. Once when we were in the truck or someplace where we were going, Papa saw a snake, a rattlesnake. Where? I want to see it. And I just climbed out of the truck, and Papa just about died. And got me back into the truck. I wanted to see everything, do everything.
Were you a tomboy?
Huh?
Were you a tomboy?
Very much.
Do you,
Always climbing and doing things.
do you remember the story that Grandpa used to tell us about your trip where he found 2 snakes that were fighting? Do you remember that?
No, 2 snakes that were biting.
Fighting.
Fighting.
Uh-huh. And one grabbed a hold of the other one by the tail, and then the first one grabbed the other one by the tail, and they commenced to eat each other up until they disappeared.
Oh.
Well, that's what he told us.
That
He used to
was
tell us kids that story.
Grandpa used to tell it.
Yeah.
Well, he could tell stories. I guess it was not true. Some of them.
Oh, we figured that.
He had a good
Anyway,
sense of humor, though.
We went to Weezer. That's where they got a home, a house, 1 bedroom, a front room, a kitchen. That's all. An outdoor toilet.
You were probably thrilled to have it.
Huh?
You were probably thrilled to have the house.
Oh yeah, thrilled there. That's where I started to school. I went to school there in Weezer, and after I was there in the 8th grade, I fell down the stairs. I fell down the steps, but feet first down, and so bumping everyone, broke my back. That's when I had suffered my back trouble. Of course, they didn't do anything about fixing it, and I just had to suffer. I remember going home and having to lean down on the ironing board to get the pressure off.
Wow.
Lean over the ironing board, to get the pressure off my back. I could never help Mama with the washing because I couldn't stand up and scrub that way.
Wow.
They eventually took me to a doctor that took x-rays and found that I had 3 broken
Discs? Vertebrae?
vertebrae. Not broken, but cracked. So that I suffered that for years and years and
Wow.
years.
Before they ever knew it.
So how did you fall down the steps?
They were just steps without any railings to hold on. They were
Oh.
steep, wooden,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just clumsy and fell. So I remember having to walk home. Oh, it was terrible.
Can we jump forward a few years when I was a child?
Sure.
Mom,
Huh?
tell us about when your father used to come and visit with us every Sunday, have dinner, work on the piano and stuff like that.
Well, he would come. He lived in a little old shack of a place where he had a bedroom of his own.
Uh-huh.
He would come and have dinner with us.
Every Sunday.
Every Sunday. And I remember one time you always kept coffee in the house for him because he wasn't a member of the church and he liked his coffee. And one time we were out of coffee and you served him postum. Do you remember?
No, I don't.
And you served him postum. And prior to this, he would not even consider drinking postum. No way. So this time you served him postum, and he thought that was the most wonderful coffee he had ever had.
Since he didn't know he had it.
Because he didn't know it wasn't coffee.
I remember you telling about the salt shaker thing too. that
Yes,
He salt everything before he'd eat it.
before he tasted it.
I used lots of salt, lots of pepper, too.
And you were always trying to get him to stop using so much salt, but he would salt everything before he even tasted it.
Yeah.
And then one time you bought a new set of salt and pepper shakers, and it had a little button on the top of the salt shaker, and you'd press it and the salt would come out the bottom. But he didn't know that, so he'd turn it over and shake it like an ordinary salt shaker, and nothing would come out, but since he couldn't see it, he was very satisfied.
Merle says he used to tune the piano every Sunday.
He'd take it completely apart. Do you remember that?
No, he didn't do it every Sunday.
Well, periodically, but he'd tune it up almost every time he came over, but sometimes he would take it completely apart, fix things, and put it back together.
You must have had the best tuned piano in town.
Yeah, it was an old upright grand.
So he was quite a character, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Well, let's go back and talk about, where were we? That was about 1917 when your little brother got influenza. Didn't the rest of you get it? Nobody else in your family got it?
No, nobody got that flu, just brother.
Uh-huh. And then that was about the time of World War I, right? 1918.
Yeah, must have been, yeah.
How old were you then? You were what,
I
12?
must have been about seven, six,
Seven?
7.
Because you were
Well,
born
let me
in
tell
what
you
year?
about that. We were there in Blackfoot that time. I think that was where it was. We were in bed and I heard this terrible commotion and saw the light into the windows was on fire. And Grandma grabbed a big quilt that she had just brought. But Grandma was with us at this time, visiting. And we all ran out, and here was down half a block from us, a livery stable with all horses
Uh-huh.
inside the barn, just screaming their heads off.
Oh.
They were all tied up and they were burned up. Oh, that stench from that, I could smell that for years.
Oh, I'll bet.
And it was terrible sound.
Those
We
horses.
just watched the fire engines there that pumped by hand. And they never couldn't get those horses out.
Oh.
I think there was 3 or 4 of them that burned up.
Oh.
That was a terrible time.
I bet. So how did the fire start? Did they ever know?
I don't know if they ever knew, or I don't remember how it started.
That's
Just like
sad.
Ferris do, Another time I remember Papa, when we were still in that town, I guess. Papa had a horse and buggy, and they ran away with him. He got, they drug him on the side. He tried to get a hold of, get the landmines, and I guess, I don't know what happened, he fell or something, and they dragged him for blocks, 2 or 3 blocks, with him holding onto the lines, He didn't let go. But he came home afterward, he was all crippled up, just torn, and I can remember that terrible time.
Why didn't he let go?
I don't know.
He wanted to hang on to him.
I don't know.
Or maybe he was stuck and couldn't let go.
I guess he thought he could hold it, get him to stop or something.
Hmm.
Papa was never a mean man, but I can remember one time when he beat the horse.
Oh, really?
Just whipped him and whipped him.
He must have been mad, huh?
I don't know what was the reason for that, but I can remember him. That. I don't know what else.
That's too bad. Well, he must have been angry at the horse.
Yeah, something.
Well, then here you're still living in Idaho. When did your family move to California?
Well, it was, I remember the 4th of July, we celebrated, and Mama had made organdy dresses for Marjorie and myself. I had a blue organdy, Marjorie's was red, or I don't know which is which.
They were
One was
fancy
red,
though, made out of
one was-
organdy.
Yeah, he made them, they were so pretty and beautiful.
Fluffy and
But she made those, and then it was a short time before we decided to move to California. Papa by this time had a car, a Ford automobile. It had a white top on the top of it instead of a clothes.
black.
Yeah, not black. It was just a white canvas top. And we went to California. I was sitting in that car and him driving. We got into some place in Oregon, and Mama got her hands shut in the door,
Oh my God.
and her hand was all mashed. Oh, she had a terrible time. And I can remember how she suffered. She was menstruating, and she had to have me help her change and wash the clothes, wash the things out. It was hard on her.
How bad. You know, it must have been hard to be a woman in those days.
Oh,
I've
must
always
have
thought
been
about
terrible.
the pioneers. How did they take care of their monthly
I
cycle?
don't know. That was just what I've often wondered. They had to use the same cloth again, so
Because
they
they
had to
couldn't
wash
throw it
them.
away.
So they just had to wash them, get them used to dry, use them again.
Must have been hard.
I remember that time so well.
So did her
But
hand?
Mom had canaries, and she would not leave them all.
Oh.
So she had one pair that she kept in a cage, and she held that cage all the way to California.
In her lap?
Yeah.
Oh, gee.
I sat in the back seat with Marjorie and Evelyn. She had her canary up the front. Oh, but on the time someplace on the road, she bashed her fingers in the car door. Well, they had to stay over for a night, and I remember that. She had a terrible time there. That was a bad time for her ministering. Anyway, we went to California and stopped at various places where they could camp, just out in the open or on the side of a road or in a sagebrush. Or I remember the first time we ever saw manzanita. We camped in that area where there was just manzanita everywhere. Papa made a fire, a campfire, but our beds as close as they could get to the one. But he sat up all night with a shotgun. Because there was our wild animals out, wolves and coyotes.
I'd be afraid of ticks.
Didn't know what else. But we got to Shasta, where Papa found I don't know whether it was a rooming house or a hotel or what, but got beds there and found out that there was full of bed bugs and lice.
Wow.
Oh, gee.
We got head lice there, and Mama had to get to a drugstore and find some fine-tooth combs and something, I don't know what they put on us, but we had head lice. So they went to California that way, all the way camping out. But he sat up at night.
How did he drive all
I don't
day and
know.
stay up
I
all
just
night?
often wondered how he got enough raced.
Did your mother ever learn to drive?
No, Mother? Oh no,
The women didn't drive then.
she never.
I bet you learned to drive.
Well, I didn't drive, I didn't learn then, I did
Right.
later.
So how old were you when you moved to California? How old were you?
Oh, I guess I was 12, 14, 13 or 14.
Uh-huh. Did you think it was a grand adventure?
Oh, sure. It was, the kids is in church. I got acquainted with a whole bunch of us.
Uh-huh.
We'd always go on drives and picnics.
Was this in California after
Yeah.
you got there?
Yeah, after we got there.
Was that Modesto that you went to at first?
Yes, at Modesto, and went to. Mama made me a pretty organdy dress that I went to church with, and I remember meeting the Norton boys, all the, the kids my age. We chased around together for ages. We'd go up into the hills. Either somebody'd have a car or else I would. I'd get Grandpa's sword.
Uh-huh.
One day I went out to the driveway and he had his car out there. And I got in and started the car and looked up and Papa was looking at me. Just let me go.
You let you go
Yeah.
just like that?
Yeah, just like that.
You didn't even know how to shift or anything?
No. Didn't know anything about a car. But I drove it. And I thought I could do anything, I guess.
You could too.
It was the trip to California that he had the Model T.
Yeah.
And I remember him telling us that there were some hills that were so steep that you had to go up
Yeah,
backwards
that's right.
because the gas tank was right up on top, just in front of the windshield.
Yeah.
And if you went up forward, then all of a sudden the engine couldn't get any gas, and so you had to turn around and go backwards up the hill. That's what I was thinking about earlier.
Yeah, I remember one time we went back up to Cambridge to visit, that Mom had to chuck the wheel to keep from going back.
Uh-huh.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Boy, traveling was really an adventure for sure.
But there in Weiser, the summertime, I remember to keep busy too. I would get out and play in the backyard and make little wooden houses out of sticks and stones and little paths and trees along the sides of the paths with weeds and everything to make it. I made the most pretty, beautiful little community there. I always had an imagination.
I'll bet that's where your son got his love of miniature stuff.
I don't know, but I would do that and just make little houses out of sticks and stones and anything. If it was a stick that wasn't clean enough, I'd clean off the branches and made the little log cabins. And I always had little paths and little trees along the side. They were made of weeds.
Uh-huh.
I remember lots of times that I'd be out there and do things like that, but Marjorie never didn't play with me.
Uh-huh.
But Mama made us sandwiches, bread and jelly,
Uh-huh.
or bread and butter, and let me play for hours like that.
Mm. What did you have to do to help her though? I'm sure she needed your help.
I never did remember having to help her in the house or anything.
Really? She let you be a free spirit.
She'd always find some kind of a book that I could read,
Uh-huh.
and I'd go climb a tree
Uh-huh.
and sit up there and read for hours and hours.
How come she let you get away with not working, do you think?
Well, there was no work to do.
You couldn't help her sweep the floor or,
No. At least I didn't.
help with the laundry,
The laundry.
hang out the clothes, any of that?
I don't remember. I guess she did it all. I don't know.
Wow, she let you be spoiled.
Well, the laundry in those days was a big chore, and a young child probably couldn't do much of it.
Oh, could hang out clothes, fold laundry or whatever.
But Marion and I would all be together, always together. I was either stay over at her place in her bedroom, but there was no place in my house for them. They didn't. I guess they wouldn't allow it anyway.
Uh-huh.
I remember going to Relief Society with her, and they were making hats, straw hats.
Uh-huh.
I remember her making the straw hat.
Did it turn out well?
Huh?
Did it turn out well?
Oh yeah, that was their work project.
Uh-huh.
I remember going to church. We'd always go to church. Mama and us girls. Papa never went with us. He'd always go, let us go, but never went to church. Mary and I sang all the time, and we'd go be in the choir.
Uh-huh.
Sang in the choir.
So did you sing duets too?
Huh?
Did you sing duets with her?
Yes, lots of times we did.
So what was your favorite kind of music to sing? What were the popular tunes of the day? Do you remember?
Can't think of the name of now.
Probably some ragtime stuff.
Huh?
Probably some ragtime music. Isn't that what they
Probably
called it?
something like that. I remember when the Lord gave a cantata once.
Uh-huh.
From the Gilbert and Sullivan.
Oh.
And they sent away to San Francisco for the costumes.
Wow.
And they did have quite a good.
Quite a big show, huh?
Yeah.
Can you remember which one it was?
Yeah, they did. They put on a show.
Was it Pirates of Penzance or
Yeah, we did that.
do you remember that?
Yeah, Pirates of Penzance.
Because you did that in Lodi years later. Mikado and Pirates, remember?
Ask her about meeting Dad.
Well, let's go back to California. We've seen the pictures of you when you were young, and you were just quite the flapper girl. Did you know at the time you were a flapper?
No, I
Did you know that was the word they used to describe you?
No, I knew that later, but I
Uh-huh.
didn't know at the time.
You always loved to dress well. So what do you remember about being like 18, 19?
Well, that's when we were chasing around with all the kids. The big
From church?
From church, yes. We'd take off in somebody's car and go up into the hills, boys and girls,
Uh-huh.
and play and swing on the trees from a rope and eat. There was never any, boys never touched us or
Mhm.
made any passes or
No
anything.
romance, huh?
No, never.
Just good time. So you know, from what you described, it doesn't sound like you ever had to work.
No work to do. It didn't happen.
Is that right? Well, now, what was your mother still alive at that point? She was, wasn't she? When you
Yes.
were that age.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah, when she died, I was already married.
Uh-huh. So then, is this where you met Edmund? Is when you were out with the gang?
Yeah. No, he was never out with us because
Oh.
he worked at that time, and he
Oh.
was one of the older men.
I see, an older fellow.
Yeah, he was 25.
Oh. And
25.
how old were you?
Well, I was only 17 or 18 at that time,
Uh-huh.
and he was in Mutual and one of the officers,
Mm-hmm.
but he was, it wasn't with our
Your group.
church that we'd go. So when I started dating Edmund, we started to go together, and I thought he was pretty special. He was an older man.
Mm-hmm. You were flattered?
Yeah, I was. And at that time, he lived with our branch president, who lived in Tracy. He was the branch president over Modesto and Stockton.
Mm-hmm.
Branch president over Stockton was Dana,
Mm.
Brother Dana. Anyway, so Brother Dana was the one that married Edmund and I in this Atkinson's home.
Mm. Well, so what was your first date? What did he ask you to do?
Oh, I don't know what the first date was. I went out with him. I thought he was pretty neat.
What did you do for a date in those days? What did you do to go out?
Just go for a ride, I guess. I can't remember going anything.
Did you go to the movies? Was that something you
we
did
went
then?
to the movies.
Go to dances?
No, I don't think we did go to dances. Not
Did
there.
you ever learn to do the Charleston?
Well, we always tried to, but we didn't do it yet. I don't remember going out and dancing.
Did your group that you belonged to, your gang of
Yeah.
kids, did you have mutual parties and that where you did dance though?
Yes, we had to do dances in church sometimes,
Uh-huh.
but I don't remember dating. The
But
dates we had would be just together, the whole bunch.
go together.
We'd go out sometimes at night, stealing watermelons,
Oh dear.
cutting them up and eating them, trying to keep from getting caught.
Uh-huh. That was the
That
adventure
was
of
the
the
worst
day.
thing I ever did.
That was the worst thing?
Not the worst thing I ever did.
Oh. Did you ever get caught?
No,
No?
never did. We'd go out and play games of, I don't know what they called it, hide and seek or something. We'd hide and they'd try to seek us,
Uh-huh.
the boys. I don't remember much.
Just had a good time, huh? I would have thought you'd have all been dancers, what were the dances of the day? The Charleston and the Lindy?
I don't
The
remember.
black bottom rag and stuff like
You
that.
weren't into dancing, huh? Didn't Lindbergh do his fight about that time too?
1927.
Oh, was that later?
Yeah.
Okay. So then after you got married,
Well, wait, before we got married,
oh,
what was I going to say?
we were talking about dancing.
Oh, we lived in a house in, what was the name of a little town east of Modesto. We had
Manteca?
a house there. And
Series.
I had
Now, were you married? Is that what you're
a,
talking
no,
about?
was not.
You were still living at
Yeah,
home?
still living at home. And somehow I don't know where I met him or how it happened that I had a date with this fella. I could never even stand to remember his name.
Really?
He took me in his car, went out somewhere, I don't know where we were going, and he tried to,
Be fresh, huh?
yes, he tried to real bad, took my hand. Oh, I was horrified, I was just absolutely, I just reached over and grabbed the other side of the car and got over. I said, take me home this minute. He never objected, thanks goodness, he didn't. I think his name was Gillespie.
Mm.
Last name, I don't remember. I've never been able to remember how come I met him or why I ever got a date with him,
Uh-huh.
but that was the first time that I ever even knew what a man looked like,
Uh-huh.
felt like.
Uh-huh.
It was a horrible experience.
Uh-huh.
I got home and
And he took you right back home?
Huh?
He took you right
took
back
me
home?
back home. Thank
You were very
goodness.
lucky that
Yeah,
he
I
did.
was. Listen, he could have really been on me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was a horrible thing for me to grab my hand, and took me over.
And you still hate it?
Yeah. So anyway,
So then did you know Edmund then, or was that before or after?
that was before.
Mm.
Later on, I met Edmund and he'd take me on dates, and we'd go on dates and have, I don't know what we did or where we went.
Did you go out to dinner?
Huh?
Did you go out to dinner?
Well, I don't remember that we ever did.
Mhm.
I don't think so. I remember him coming to get me, or to come to our house when he was going to have a date, and he'd come, and I'd run to him, and we'd hug and kiss, because he was crazy about me then. But he still lived in, he lived in Tracy.
Uh-huh.
From Tracy to Modesto was about 32 miles, I think, something
35.
like that. But on cold nights, and he had this little Ford open coupe,
Oh my.
and he'd freeze to death about.
But he did it.
No, he didn't freeze.
No, but he was willing to do that, to come and visit
Oh
you.
yeah, he went through a lot to visit. I remember one time he came, and it was so cold and so late that Mama, they had insisted that he stay overnight. we made a cot, opened a cot in that front room, and he stayed there. That wasn't long after that until we got engaged. He came in with a beautiful diamond, and
How did he give it to you?
I don't know. We just were in the car, and he just said, "You're going to marry me, and this is our engagement." I guess it was like that.
So then what did your parents think? Were they happy for you?
Oh yeah, they had agreed.
They liked Edmund? Did he ask your father for your hand before
I don't
he
think so. I don't think so. I don't know if he did. I don't remember.
So then how long was it before you got married?
Oh, let's see. September. Must have been 7 or 8 months. Because it was in September 2nd when we married. And I remember it was winter time when he coming over to visit. When we got married, then he took me to Tracy. We had our first apartment. One apartment with a bathroom and a kitchen and a back porch with a screened back porch. And we had Mom come to stay with us one time, and she was very sick. I remember her coughing. See, she had what we know now is
Congestive heart failure. Was it congestive heart failure?
Yes, congestive heart failure. It must have been. It was just like what they
Coughing,
said.
yeah.
You need oxygen and coughing. But we didn't know how sick she was. So they took her to the hospital in Modesto. And I was there to visit them. I went there when I knew she was so sick. And all they did was just come by once in a while and look at her. Didn't do anything for her. Of course, I guess they didn't hear
Maybe
what
they
to do.
didn't have
know.
anything to do for her.
No.
They didn't have antibiotics or anything to
No,
give to her.
it didn't have antibiotics, it didn't have oxygen,
Yeah.
which of course is what she needed.
Yeah.
She coughed so bad.
So then did she die that time?
I remember going to the hospital twice. This once when I sit beside her in the bed, and I thought, why is it they can't do anything for this, for her?
And so Marjorie and Evelyn were teenagers
Yeah,
then.
they were. Well, Evelyn was about 10,
Uh-huh.
and Marjorie. Later on, Marjorie started dating Harold Eyre,
Uh-huh.
and I don't know who she dated before that, but she got pregnant
Oh.
by somebody, and I didn't know what to do for her, and I took her for a lot of rides in our bumpy old car.
Uh-huh.
I thought maybe that would jolted. I don't know how she got an abortion, but she did.
Really?
I don't know whether the doctor did it or how it just happened.
Mm.
But she did have an abortion.
Wow. That must have been some in those days.
Yeah.
Did women do that a lot then?
I guess I don't know. You mean have abortions?
Uh-huh.
Well, I don't know. I have no idea. I didn't know about it then. But I'd take her on this bumpy roads of this car and try and do what I thought maybe would cause it.
Uh-huh.
And I was as green as she was.
And by then your mother had passed away, so you didn't
Yeah.
have any advice from your mother. Who raised Marjorie and Evelyn after your mother died?
What?
Who raised them after your mother died? Did they just live with your
Just
father?
both of them.
It must have been hard for Evelyn being so
Yeah.
young.
She was young. She started to date
Jay.
Jay, and he loved her a lot. He was a college age, been in football, and they married real young. She must have been about 15.
Really?
Yeah. He's about the same age.
Well, he was older than that because he was in college.
Yeah.
Well, I
He
guess
might
it
have been
was-
19 or something like
Yeah,
that.
something like that.
Hmm. That's really hard time at 10 to lose your mother.
Yes, we grew up in a hard time when we didn't know anything, or how to do anything, or what to do about something. It was a hard time.
So you did the
We
best you
didn't
could.
realize it then.
No. You just did the best you could, huh? Well, so Edmund didn't have to be in World War One.
No.
He was too old or too young, right?
Too young.
Guess he was too old, he had a job, I don't know
No, he
why.
was too young for World War One.
Was he? Do you remember any effect that the war had? Do you remember?
Well, yes, see, after we were married and had the children, I remember working in the defense plant.
That was World War II, though,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So what did you do?
I listed parts, physically wrote them down on a pad.
Uh-huh.
You know, so many of this. Had to
Like
count
an
everything.
inventory?
Yeah. So I was listing or writing all the parts that were packed
Uh-huh.
for shipment over. And I remember going every day in my car. I drove to the defense plant there in Stockton. And
It was out on Rough and Ready Island. Remember that? It was called Rough and Ready Island.
Yeah, Ready Island. And I remember going every day and working at it.
What did you do with your children?
Well, they were in school and they came home after school, and
Mhm.
I guess they just ran until Grandpa got back. But Papa came in home, not Papa, but Edward,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
and he'd take care of them.
Huh.
I remember her going to the defense plant to work during the war.
Hmm. Well, how did you feel about having to do that? Did you want to go to work, or did they?
No, you had to
But
go.
you just
somebody
had to?
go to work, and
Mhm.
that was a way to make some money.
Uh-huh.
And I bought several war bonds, which we could put in the bank, and then unfortunately later on when we had to cash those in, that's how we could buy a home.
Uh-huh.
I remember working with different people. I remember those soldiers that we had they were incarcerated. I mean, they were captured, German,
Uh-huh.
but they would march on the outside of the compound, not outside, but in the compound. They'd have them march and sing.
Really?
Yeah, they'd sing that.
Were they Germans?
Yeah, they were German
Really?
soldiers.
And was that on Rough and Ready Island too?
Yeah, that's when I worked.
Mm-hmm. What did they sing? German songs.
Da 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 da. I can't remember the tune.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was.
I didn't realize they brought German soldiers to the
Yeah,
United
they did.
States.
Yeah.
Hmm. So that was quite an experience. What were they building there? Do you remember? That defense plant. What did
No,
it build?
they
It
were
was a
packing
it was a
all
supply
these-
depot.
Oh, it was a supply depot.
Supply depot.
I
Yeah.
see.
They packed everything.
To ship it somewhere else.
Yeah, to ship it to overseas,
Uh-huh.
to the
War effort.
To the war.
whatever it was.
In the Pacific, and
Yeah.
during this time, Dad worked
yeah,
in Sears, didn't he?
yeah. It was Sears.
So he got his first. Was that his first job at Sears?
No,
He'd worked for
He
other.
worked for Sears,
Pennies.
then Pennies.
No, Pennies and then Sears. His last job that he had until he went into business for himself was at Sears. He worked
Yeah.
for Pennies before.
He worked for Pennies when he was sent down to Anaheim.
Uh huh.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't it Norwalk?
They gave him a little rundown store, penny store,
Uh huh.
to manage, but he hadn't had enough experience in
Uh-huh.
managing.
Oh.
He was never aggressive enough. He
Uh-huh.
was always timid. But he did stay there 3 years, and then they canned him.
Uh huh.
Then he had to go back up to Stockton.
Because it didn't work out.
No,
Mm.
because he was so timid. He didn't have the ability to tell people what to do or how to do things. You know, he was never aggressive.
How did that affect you? Because you were very aggressive.
Yeah.
Was that hard for you?
Well, it was hard. So I had our babies. I had Norma then.
You must have had Jerry too then.
Huh?
You had Jerry too then if you
Yeah,
had
Jerry
Norma.
and Norma.
When we left Anaheim, wait first.
It was Norwalk, wasn't it Norwalk? Because
Yes, Norwalk.
that's where Norma was born. Was in Norwalk.
Yeah.
This is in Norwalk. And Norma was a baby. I would hire a girl to come take care of her, you know, babysit.
Mhm.
And I'd take off the car and go into Los Angeles.
Really?
Yeah. I wanted to see everything.
Oh.
And I'd go there and buy a ring or a necklace or something just to buy. But,
So that's how you survived, huh?
yeah,
Do you think you did that just to have something to do?
I think I did.
You just were needing an adventure? You must have been bored.
I was bored. We didn't have very many friends. We had my Uncle Ed and his wife lived in, where'd they live? We lived in Norwalk and they lived in Anaheim, I think.
I don't know about that.
Anyway, my Uncle Ed and his wife and their 3 children. They were closer to us. Dad would come and see us, or we'd go have us over at their place quite a bit.
Well, at least you had some family there then, huh? It must have been hard on Ed knowing that he wasn't doing a good job too.
Must have been.
And not knowing what to do about it. You know, not knowing how to solve the problem.
Yeah,
They were probably putting a lot of pressure on him.
that must have been. Yeah, sure they were.
So that was a hard time for him.
That's when I was pregnant with Norma. They had her. When we left Norwalk, we packed the car and made a bed in the back seat with Merle and
Jerry and Norma.
Jerry.
Uh-huh.
It's traveled all night long to get back up to Stockton.
Uh-huh.
We got up there where they both had a hip hoot off.
Oh no.
Had what?
And Jerry.
Whooping cough.
Oh,
Yeah. And they had his folks. We had a little tiny bedroom, just a regular bed, and it was not hardly room enough for the crib, which we had to keep the 2 in.
Uh-huh.
They had a big garden. His mother was not very nice to me.
Really?
Never was.
What do you think's the reason?
Oh, I don't know what was the reason. She didn't like the way I dressed the kids, didn't like the way I fed them. Sometimes I'd go out and pick a few string beans to cook for them, and she'd get mad at me for that.
Really?
Yeah, she.
What did she want you to feed him?
Huh?
What did she want you to feed him?
I don't know. I can't blame everything onto her. I was green too. I didn't know.
Uh-huh.
No place I could fix, do things for myself.
Right. It's hard to live with somebody else.
Yeah. I never got into town, got a little dump to live in. It was terrible. 1 bedroom, another room. The bathroom had a tin tub. Some kind of an iron tub.
Old-fashioned, really.
Yeah, awful. And I remember I hated that place. I think we were there 3 or 4 months before we found a place on the Delbert Avenue. This little house that we found. And Papa paid, Ed paid, I think they paid $1,300 for it.
Wow.
And so we lived it. He helped modernize that and fix it up, painted it real good.
So that was your first home, really?
Yeah.
Your first real
It had a
home.
back porch on it, which was screened in. I can't remember whether we did it or whether it was that way when we bought there. And this long driveway where we had our car was on gravel floor. But this tank house was real tall.
Mm-hmm.
Had a big water tank on the top of
Yeah.
it with a windmill
Yeah, that's what we had.
to pump water up.
Mm.
And then later, Dad put in an electric pump and made it all automatic, and it was much better. How did you heat your water in that house for hot water?
I don't remember, just on the stove, I guess. I don't think.
No, there was an old water heater in its own little closet, but it wasn't an automatic water heater. You had to turn it on and start the fire to heat water,
Yeah,
and then after you had your bathing and stuff, then you had to be sure and turn it off so it wouldn't blow the house up.
Wow.
yeah, it was pretty awful.
How many bedrooms did that house have?
Just one.
That's
One
right.
bedroom, which is Dad and I, about, what do you call those beds?
Cot,
Cots.
bunk beds.
Huh?
Norma and Jerry slept in bunk beds,
They set these bunk beds, one on top of the other.
Mm-hmm.
and
In
I
the front, in part of the dining room. Yeah, on a wall next to the bathroom.
That's right. And I slept in a fold-up cot that you had to set up every night.
Fold up cot in the bedroom. That was her only place he slept in that until we moved away from there and went on to,
We lived in that house until I was 10 years old,
yeah,
and then we moved to,
Sierra Nevada.
yes, well, it was San Mateo.
So did you sleep in that same cot all those years?
Yeah. San
For 10
Mateo
years.
Avenue. 10 years, yeah.
Wow.
Then we moved, you bought a nicer home that had 2 bedrooms,
Yeah,
and Norma and Jerry and I all slept in the same bedroom until Norma got to be like 13 years old or something, and then Dad built another bedroom up over the garage for Jerry and I.
that's where they stayed.
So you lived through some really tough times.
Yeah.
You know, you lived through the Depression.
Yeah.
How did you survive the Depression? Did Ed have a job all that time?
Well, yes, he always had a job. He worked at Penny's and Sears.
That was lucky he had a
Yeah,
job.
Yes, he did.
We need to wrap this up.
That was hard times,
We're running
wasn't
out
it?
of time.
How do you think people managed? How did they survive? I mean, you just had to?
I forgot to tell you that Edmund's father was a piano tuner also.
Right.
So he would always work.
So somehow you always survive. Well, you know, we have to go pretty soon, but we never have talked about any part really that the church played in your lives, and I know it did. You were always active in church?
Yeah.
And the church was always important to you?
The kids were always in the program for the young people, you know, that, what would they call?
Mutual?
Yeah, Mutual was what was for young men and young women.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
Well, now they
Emma.
call it the Young Men and Young Women. Then it was called the Mutual Improvement Association.
MIA.
Yeah, but how, those certificates that they gave.
Priesthood?
Huh?
I don't remember what that is.
I don't either. I have some myself, so I know what you mean.
Like, you know what works
It's like you work towards certain levels of things. So the church was always important to you, or were there times when you kind of got away?
Oh, I was always important. Always went to church. I was always into music.
Mm-hmm.
Sang with the singing mothers,
Uh-huh.
and I remember Elsie Kidd and her sister
Ellen?
Ellen Burt. They were sisters.
Uh-huh.
And about the time that Norma was dating, well, she dated several boys. One time that she dated somebody, and he gave her a ring or a watch or something, but she sent it back. She would never date him anymore, and I never could figure out why. I think it must have been something pretty bad, because she was always very popular, but she never just chased around. But she knew Val from the time that they were about the same age. 16, I think.
Well, she'd known him before that.
Yeah,
I mean,
Church.
they grew up together.
yeah, that's true.
Well, before we leave, one of the things that's kind of nice to have on video is to tell the people who will see this, you know, whether it's our children or whoever else's, what you want them to know. If you can learn from your own experiences, what kind of advice would you give to your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren? Or
Well, I'd say for them to play with and date members of the church. Stay close to the church all their life.
and that's good advice.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about your testimony at all? I know you had a wonderful time at the Washington Temple when you served there.
Yeah. Well, that was a wonderful experience to be called to the. I had no idea that I'd be called to the temple service. I just put in for a mission. When they sent those papers, I just about went wild. Norma and I. Yeah, and it was very. It was a great experience to work there for a year in a temple like that.
It was hard work, I'll bet.
Well,
Took a lot of time. What would you say you learned from that experience?
well, of course, I learned more about the temple experience, the meaning of it, by having to go through and work with them all of that time. Which, of course, before I had gone, I didn't have any clue of what the temple was about. Since it was so many years since Edmund and I had gone to the temple, it was like a new experience altogether.
So it was a great benefit to you then.
Yeah.
So do you want to tell your progenitors about your testimony?
Did I tell them?
No, would you like to now? Would you like them to know that you have a testimony?
Well, I have a testimony of the truthfulness of the gospel and the truthfulness of going to the temple and experience those special ceremonies, to study and learn the gospel more by study and prayer, and stay close to the church all the days of their life, and to date and have friendships with people in the church always.
How about your own testimony?
Well, what can I say?
Well, what do you believe?
Oh, I believe the church is true and know it is true, and I have a testimony of the truthfulness of it.
And Joseph Smith?
Yes.
And the
I know that
prophet?
Joseph Smith was a prophet.
And the Book of
Our
Mormon is
prophet
true?
now is a prophet that we have. We have to study and read all about all the prophets and all the general authorities.
And you believe they are, I know. So, well, we have to leave to go back to California pretty soon, but I think we've had a pretty good time. we've really stirred up your brain here, haven't we?
Okay.